inviting me. And as Bruce's been doing a lot of work on this area over the years, and we've worked together for quite a long time. And I know that Viv's work's been often kind of revolutionary and provocative. So coming to what I've called Viv's conference is I thought I'd just have a few provocative questions and ideas sort of stuck in along the way. So if you feel you're being prodded, it's because you are, and I hope to be able to live up to that revolutionary stuff that Viv's often been part of. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions, and I'm going to also end with a question. I think one of the questions that the conference itself is trying to establish is how we provide a quality experience for all students, not just international students, and how we design a learning environment that prepares students to work and live in the new globalised world that we find ourselves in. But true to form, in the process of answering those questions, I just want to backtrack a little bit and refer really to what Paul was talking about this morning, and also what Jeanette referred to in those negative discourses. And the interesting thing about negative discourses is that they're not confined to international students. Actually, we apply them to all our students, which I'm sure they're all very happy about. And this is kind of formulating a bit of a different sort of track with the new fees coming in September. There's quite a lot of discourses that revolve around the idea of students as kind of angry customers, and you know, the students as kind of potentially litigious. You know, they're paying for this education. You know, they're going to come back at us and say, "What am I getting for my £9,000? And what are we going to say to them?" And you know, so those sorts of discourses are actually, I think, quite interesting. And I think the thing about the learning context and developing those positive learning contexts is the answer to that question, actually. Just to sort of demonstrate those kind of discourses, if you like. Is it going to work? Yes. Students could be tough customers. It's all over the place, and Paul mentioned the Times Higher friend to the universities this morning. Also, deeply friendly to international students. You'll often find those negative discourses flying around in the Times Higher and in the media generally. But there's a kind of general sort of frisson of negativeness about students as a whole, and this is sort of part of that. So students could be tough customers. So what do we do? I was asked by the University World News, which is a kind of online journal, newspaper type thing, to write something. And they gave me an open brief, which I thought, brilliant, an opportunity for a rant. There's nothing like a good rant. And so this was a 1,000-word opportunity to answer the question, should we listen to students? Like the answer to most things, the answer to that is, well, it depends. Depends what they're saying. And should we listen to student voices? And obviously, universities are pretty scared of student voices these days, for all those reasons to do with the National Student Survey and you know, feedback from students and how it sort of positions universities in league tables. So my answer to that question was, should we listen to students? Well, it's fine to listen to students if the learning environment is right. Because if the learning environment is right, they will say all the things that you want them to say. And if they're not saying if the learning environment isn't right, and they're not saying all the things you want them to say, you should listen to them even more, because they're absolutely bound to rights. So those sorts of things, I think, are underpinning ideas about internationalisation even more now than they were in the past. So there's links to these articles if you'd like to read them at some point. So just sort of backtracking a bit, how do we get those learning environments right, so that they're kind of developing students to be ready for these global environments, for a globalised world. And if you listen to the student voices in the right, that come from the right environments, those positive learning environments, they will tell you that it's not just about the qualification and the job. That's not why students come to university generally, to get a qualification and get a better job. Obviously that is an important outcome. But the student voices from these positive learning environments will tell you that they come because they want to learn more about others. They want to learn about themselves. They want to learn about others. And it's those transformations in selves and others that are really aspects of university education that we should be trying to cultivate for the benefit of all students. I'm going to talk about two research projects. The first one I'm going to start with, and this one is a project that I did relating to looking at student attitudes to intercultural learning. In this project, I asked students in 3 different disciplines how they felt about working with students from other nationalities and from other cultures. Being the kind of, again, as business design and engineering, those were the students that I asked. And being the negative person that I am, and cynic, I thought that they would tell me all the things that they've been telling me that over the last 10 years about difficulties of working together, those issues of, problems of mixing. In fact, what I found was something quite different. I'm going to tell you what I found in a moment, but before I tell you what I found, the data that I'm looking at in this little snippet that I'm talking to you about was from the School of Design. And very importantly, this was a very specific type of learning environment. You might see across the bottom of the slide, assessment for learning. The centre that I was working at Northumbria was focusing on assessment for learning environments. And those assessment for learning environments were about authentic learning, challenging learning, and complex learning, to cut a very, very long story short. And so this project I was looking at in design was specifically where students, both undergraduate and postgraduate students, were engaged in authentic learning experiences. So one was where they were designing a mobile phone, actually for a mobile phone company, and that was integrated into the assessment processes of their module. And the second one was where the students were researching an actual project related to a building in Newcastle, where they were designing a sort of revamp for this building, and they were actually designing it for the city council. So these were kind of challenging learning environments where the students were kind of out of the university and in the community, working with actual groups and industry. So this, keep that in the back of your mind, okay? So what did the students say in this learning environment? Well, in this learning environment, students were really positive about working with students from different cultures. And whilst I expected them to say how difficult it was, they actually said how appealing it was. And that was not just the international students, but it was just home students as well, if you like. And they were very interested in the other students, and they found this. In fact, one of the students from the business group that I interviewed said, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. I'm on an international business course. Of course I need to interact with students from other cultures. And I was kind of behind in my thinking. And we've been talking this morning, very interesting discussion this morning about group work and how that works, and that was really interesting. And what I found was when they were working in groups, the students in the design school, working in groups, there was conflict in groups, because it is true to say that students both love and dread group work, depending on how well it's designed and how well it's scaffolded. But what happened in these design groups was that the conflict came from disciplinary cultures, not from national cultures. So they were talking about, well, so the groups were fashion designers, industrial designers, design managers, and that was where the conflict was kind of coming from. That and the fact that actually people are, once you get people into groups, there's friction anyway. Because everyone's got their own background, and as this student says, everyone thinks they're right. So there's a clash of opinions. But national cultures were not an issue. In this day, language seemed to be less of an issue in this particular learning environment, and one of the students says, well, I don't think there's anybody on our course who can't understand, who has a problem talking. There's some English people who can't speak, and many of the students in the business group as well as the design group were also learning languages as part of their degrees. So they were already either learning languages, and many of them were actually multilingual, bilingual or multilingual. So again, this question about language was kind of perplexing them a little bit. So what do you mean? What? Language is an issue, what do you mean? Having said that, in each of the three discipline areas, business, design and engineering, there was one example of where language was so low, language ability was so low that it destroyed the group work. But those were kind of isolated incidents where communication was destroyed by language falling below a particular level. But that interaction in the group work between the students, between those disciplines and between those different cultures, the students found it really transformative. And for example, this student saying, you interact with so many people, it's not easy, you're not comfortable, but that's what changes you. You have to change yourself. In order for that to be successful, and if you want to fit in, everybody has to change. And that sort of transformative element of education is what really we're looking at, and really what we're aiming for. And when I'm saying cultures, the students had a really advanced kind of sense of difference within cultures. And there's quite a number of Indian students who really made a distinction between Bombay and Delhi, for example. Such a great cultural difference between Bombay and Delhi. And this acknowledgement of diversity within cultures and students understanding that really to an advanced level was something different that I'd seen. And it also happened within the UK student group. Students saying, well, actually, sometimes I don't get on with people who just live around the corner from me. You know, we've got different senses of humour. We're different culturally. We're different. Just because we both live in Whitley Bay doesn't mean to say that we get on. Again, same idea. Working with students from your own country is a cross-cultural experience if you're thinking about culture differently. And generally, people, once you get to university and you get into these groups and you get interacting with people, that interaction and that conflict with people is what is the source of transformation. And people are pretty argumentative, apparently, according to the students. There's a different opinion about everything. And the problem is to get people to be a bit more flexible about things. So those are the kind of processes that we're going through in these groups. So in this data set that I had, I really sensed that there was a change in the way students were thinking about their education. As you can see, this is from a British postgraduate design student. I don't think there's one person in our class who's averse to diversity. I think we cherish and welcome it. As long as it's working and it's not for the sake of it, but it's kind of a good thing. A good collaboration between other cultures is great. It's what we want. So this sense that students really do want this international interaction is really prevalent, I think. But having said this, of course, these were particular teaching, it was a particular teaching and learning environment. And I know that work's been done elsewhere, particularly where group work is assessed, and that generates conflict. And I think if you looked at the learning environment where group work is assessed and there's this kind of pressure involved, you would find something quite different. And it's kind of it's a bit of a no-brainer really. If there's pressure, if there's competition, then there'll be conflict, and there'll be there won't be a collaborative atmosphere. So that transformations and that interaction is more difficult. So what is it about that learning environment then that was kind of different? And I think this is one thing we talked about again. This is the assessment thing. If interaction is low stakes, then that will generate positive and perhaps compromising, forgiving interactions. So do you know what I mean by low stakes? It doesn't have assessment attached. It's an opportunity for practice. And this student says, on this course it's easier maybe to talk to each other because of the way it works, sat around the tables. It's more about group conversation. So stakes are not high. It's open-ended. Those learning environments are open-ended. We talked again a little bit this morning in our groups about open questions. It was, Liz Lye's, Liz Lye's presentation was about giving students open opportunities online to interact with each other. So where environments are more open-ended, you're much more likely to get positive interaction. So it's loose group work. It's probably been dead easy to communicate. Where students have got prior experience of each other and of the methods that you're trying to kind of use. I'll give you an example of this. We had a member of staff who introduced really interesting and innovative group work into the final semester of a Year 3 English Literature course. It was a great idea. Got students to work in groups to produce a poetry anthology, collect the poetry together, develop themes, and that was the assessment. The students hated it. They were up in arms, they were furious because they had never actually worked together like that previously on their degree programme. That was the first time they'd had an opportunity to do that, and it was in the final semester where everything counted. So it's about developing that kind of prior experience of these learning approaches to learning that is really important. And things have to be authentic and challenging, I think. It's about having something real to do, having something that makes sense and is meaningful, and is not just about making students jump through hoops. It has to be meaningful, it has to be relevant, and it has to be relevant to their future careers. This is getting back to the kind of employability thing. If you think about the School of Design and the students developing, designing mobile phones, this is authentic interaction with real tasks. And it needs to be a bit troublesome in a way. I think intercultural interaction is troublesome, and that's where the transformation comes from. When I say troublesome, I don't mean problematic, but I mean that it's not easy. But the very fact that it's not easy is where those transformations come from. So if you give students things to do, it's to do with laziness, we're exactly the same. If you have an easy way, why take the harder way? I certainly wouldn't. So yeah, so how can we, that's kind of looking at one sort of research project. And before we go on, has anyone commented so far?
Catherine, what do you mean by troublesome spaces? Do you mean that's kind of a good thing, or we should be doing that? Or
yeah, I think troublesome spaces are a good thing. Yeah, I think those spaces going back to it really goes back to the kind of authentic and challenging thing. So where there's some kind of issue to be grappled with, it's that almost, if you're familiar with the threshold concepts idea, anyone familiar with those ideas where students have to kind of grapple with particular concepts before they can move on? I think intercultural learning is a little bit like that. You need that kind of troublesomeness and that difficultness to kind of move on with where you are. So I think, how do we get that going? And I think the role of the informal curriculum in this is huge. And I think this is kind of, again, in a sense, universities are a little bit behind in acknowledging this, because I think students are already doing this. Students are already engaging with the informal curriculum, and that sort of is sort of obvious from the sorts of volunteering that students do at university now. I don't know about, does anyone know about the volunteering systems at Sheffield? Anyone involved in them from the Students' Union? Is it big at Sheffield, or is it, you're in Sheffield Town? Yeah, huge. Yeah, and at Northumbria it is absolutely enormous. We set up a Global Citizenship Award, which was meant to acknowledge students' engagement with volunteering. And what we found was actually absolutely amazing, because we handed out 200 awards for students who had been engaged in kind of activities. And these activities varied from stuff that was happening actually in the university, but not directly in the curriculum. So things like learning, leadership, and mentoring, and those sorts of things. To things like engagement outside of the university with age concern and those sorts of things. And that represented 16,000 hours of volunteering. But our student union told us that represented a tiny fraction. We'd only captured a tiny fraction of that. And the reason why we'd only captured a tiny fraction of it was because the students were telling us, well, actually I'm not interested in a Global Citizenship Award. I'm not doing it for awards. I'm not going to bother sort of applying for the award, because I'm doing it because it's important. It's important for my skills as a graduate. It's giving me different things that the university education is not giving me. And I'm engaging with it because I want to, and I think it's an important thing. And those activities were not just things like engaging with international kind of activities. There were those. I mean, a lot of students have done things like gone to the Gambia and set up sports development projects in the Gambia. Brilliant, amazing things. But some students had engaged with something different from themselves that was on their doorstep. So the age concern thing is a case in point, isn't it? That's a cross-cultural experience. Students had engaged with all sorts of projects. An English literature student had set up a writing project, creative writing project in Newcastle with groups of asylum seekers and refugees who were engaging in creative writing and produced an anthology. I can tell you lots and lots and lots of examples, but students really are engaging with this sort of activity, and they're seeing it as part of their learning experience that's contributing to their development and their sort of their value as a graduate. So how do we kind of, how do we bring that in? How do we bring that into the university? Because at the moment it's not being acknowledged by the curriculum. So the example of the girl who's doing the literature project with the asylum seekers, very interestingly, for her third year dissertation, did a project on public poetry. So can you see the links there between public poetry and this sort of group? But actually her dissertation didn't even mention that project, because what the discipline of literature understands by public poetry is the poet laureate. And so that was irrelevant really to her sort of work as her community work, even though she received awards for her community work. So you see, the curriculum wasn't. It's not fitting. It's not meshing. It's not managing to kind of to acknowledge those activities. So I think, how do we kind of move towards, and I think we are moving towards it. I think we're moving, you know, I think Jeanette's absolutely right. The time for internationalisation has come, and Viv was talking just before we started there about how exciting it is that things are really starting to happen. So how do we kind of get these things into the university? How do we change it? I think one of the things that first steps really in terms of internationalisation, weirdly, is to stop talking about international. Because I think when we're talking about internationalisation, we set off on the same set of tracks, we set off on the same discussions. If we could just ignore internationalisation from now on, I think we might get somewhere, and drop that international element and focus on learning. What should future learning at university be like? What should it look like? But we stick to these things, don't we? We stick to these binaries of us and them, and home students, international students, Western thought, Western and Eastern. That's just it's just such a total nonsense. It just does not make sense. For a start, the West is not in the West, it's in the North. And the West includes Japan, which is in the East. And, you know, so these things are meaningless things that categorise the world into two halves. And then we bring those two halves back into the university and say, well, actually, we're the Western thinkers here, and you know, we need people to think Western. But I mean, those are old ways of thinking, but we still use those terms. The language takes us in the same directions. We keep going in the same directions. So, to some extent, it's about dropping those words. How are we doing for time?
You've got another 10 minutes and then questions.
10 minutes and then questions, that should be fine, yeah. Just another project that I wanted to talk to you about, because again, I just want to underline how students can really inform us of you know, the ways that we should go, the ways that we should be thinking about internationalisation in the curriculum. And we did another project where we worked with engineering students, and we asked the engineering students what they thought a global engineer was, and how could we educate a global engineer. And we nabbed them when they came out of their exams one day, and they were all sort of dazed and stuff, and gave them a postcard and said, write stuff down on that. And they stuck their postcard into the box, and we got 81 first years and 74 second year postcards, which told us what the qualities of global engineer were, and how universities should be educating them. So what did they say? We analysed these with the software package Envivo, and three themes emerged. The students were telling us that a global engineer needs to be thinking in an interdisciplinary way. Can't say that. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Not just about engineering, it's about other disciplines, and I'll come to that in a minute. Global engineers need to be multiliterate, not just skills in engineering. And global engineers need to be able to cross boundaries. Just say a little bit about each one of those. So the first year said, well, actually, what we need in our engineering curriculum is we need robotics, we need communications, we need drawing, we need chemistry, we need physics, and we need maths in our engineering. That's a kind of expected. You would kind of expect quite a lot of those things in engineering. But by the time they got to the second year, they changed their minds. Actually said, we need geography, we need sociology, we need languages, we need study of religion and cultures. And we didn't ask them to list disciplines. We just asked them what they thought global engineers should have. These global engineers, they told us that the global engineers need to be multiliterate, not just the usual skill set. Okay, it's the usual skill set of engineering, but they need to be able to apply that in lots of different ways and in lots of different places. So they need to be creative, they need to be innovative, abilities to work with different people well. And interestingly, again, this thing, they need to be global engineers need to be multilingual. They need to be culturally diverse and aware of different unit applications. And finally, global engineers need to be able to cross boundaries. And this was boundaries between the university and the community, not just national boundaries, it was all about how engineering disciplines need to get out there and be applied, between the practical and the theoretical, interaction with businesses, mixing the course subjects from universities in different other countries. Because they said, the students said, that this will enable the students to start seeing the bigger picture. So just going back to the assessment for learning things I was talking about earlier, it's about real life situations, you need to understand ethics, not just European internationalisation, but other internationalisation as well. And then there's some conflicts like less specialism and a 5-year course. Interesting. Well, we could talk about those for a long time, but we don't have time. So I think there's two, what I sort of gained from both of those projects is that there's really two underlying principles. Students need to feel a sense of belonging in terms of the content they're learning. And they need to feel a sense of belonging in the ways that they're learning and in the learning community itself. And that learning needs to be transformative. And in some of the ways that I've kind of outlined and I've talked about there. Very quickly, because I think I've got 5 minutes left now here, I also asked some staff, just to get a bit of a staff view going in there. I got a staff focus group together of 30 staff. After a presentation that I'd given about the sort of global engineer type thing, I got them together, staff together, and asked them what they thought and how those things could look, what they might look like in terms of the curriculum. And what they said was quite interesting, and links again to what Jeanette was saying this morning. Again, the answer is it depends, as usual. And what the curriculum might look like will depend on what the world looks like in 10 years' time. Where the pivots of power, finance and education are located, and there's a kind of, the word China kept reoccurring. We'll increasingly need to teach flexibility, problem solving, those skills which are sometimes rather insultingly referred to as soft skills. We need to get universities and disciplines to get out of their boxes and overcome disciplinary conventions. Again, same stuff coming through as from the students. Dissolve those boundaries. Dissolve the boundaries between the university. The university's not an ivory tower anymore. Places of learning have got to be different. Times of learning, the whole locus of where we learn has got to be different. The curriculum needs to be more vague. Can you imagine senior management thinking this is a good idea? The curriculum needs to be vague, and which leaves more space for development and creativity. Are we going in that direction? Increasing use of real-world triggers. I think this is happening a little bit. Use people and places. Value and discover the tacit and hidden skills and activities of students. Again, this is internationalisation without calling it internationalisation. Use the multicultural texture and composition of local places and universities, not just distant places. And how will we know if it's worked? I was talking to Andrew earlier about his alumni project, which sounds really, really interesting. I've been saying for quite a while, we need to find out, get our alumni back and let them tell us what's happened. One of the staff in this focus group said, wait for 5 or 10 years, go and get your students and get them to come back and give us retrospective judgments about whether the programme supported them in their employability or not. Can be done. Here's my provocative question. If staff and students really do know, and I hope you can see from what I've said today, I think students do know and staff do know what's required. Why hasn't it happened yet? It has happened. It's happened in pockets, and there are pockets of excellence. But why hasn't it kind of all happened? And I shall leave it at that. Thank you.
So we've gone beyond international
internationalisation now into learning and higher education itself. No surprises there. Okay, so anyone any questions for? That's very provocative. Perhaps you'd like to answer the question.
The notion of dropping internationalisation, but wondered what the senior managers would think about that, because isn't that the driver for the money, basically?
Yeah, you can still hear me if I've taken the microphone off. Did you hear that question? Would senior managers like it if we dropped in the international and internationalisation? Well, I don't know. They might, but again, because the idea of internationalisation is linked with kind of bringing international students into the university, they might not. But I think that's also going to change because our UK students are becoming fee-paying customers as well. So kind of think maybe, yeah, I don't know. Let's try it, shall we? Let's ask them.
I was interested in the Motorola example and your use of the term low stakes. One of the issues that often hear about is around student engagement or lack of student engagement. And one of the responses to that is to make things high stakes to lack engagement. How do you square those?
Yeah. I think when I'm talking about low stakes, I'm talking about marks, assessment marks. And I think you're absolutely right. I think your version of high stakes is about complex learning and about challenging learning. My version of high stakes is, if we want students to do it, we have to put a mark on it. I don't think that's the case at all. I think let's take the marks off. And then...
So was the Motorola example a mark-free environment? Just this is part of it, just coursework.
The Motorola, basically what they had to do for that Motorola project was they had to design a mobile phone. And what they did was they actually got somebody from Motorola, and amazingly, they got this guy to come in from America. He was in the UK already. He got him to come up to Newcastle. And at the beginning of the project, he sat with the students and talked to them about, design and so on. And then their assessment was actually designing the mobile phone. But the kind of marks bit was dropping away, if you see what I mean, because what they were doing, they were actually designing this mobile phone to give to the guy from Motorola. And actually, in the past, sometimes they've taken on those designs and they've actually used them as, and student designs have kind of, actually been taken on and they've worked. So although the assessment was to design the mobile phone, but because it was so engaging and challenging and real, the kind of marks thing was dropping away, the importance of that, and it was the task.
Or if something's engaging enough, then maybe it doesn't matter if it is quite high stakes.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not the high stakes thing. So high stakes is good if it's about challenge and kind of competitiveness. It's not good if it's about assessment marks at the end. If that makes sense.
Thank you for your presentation, very interesting. And you mentioned students, they want to get one kind of feeling of belonging to the university, something like that. But currently, UK government, they changed the policy. For example, like they cancelled the PSW, the immigration policy. So before that, the students, they can, when they graduate, they can have 2 years stay in UK looking for a job. And now they cancelled. Do you think it maybe affect students get this kind of belonging feeling? Because when they graduate, they must go back to home.
Yeah. I think there's two answers to that. I think in one way, yes, you're right, that context, or that sort of wider political context, will always influence what's happening in the university. But I mean, I think the other answer to that is the belonging needs to come from the curriculum. So that sense of belonging, they need to feel a sense of belonging in terms of their discipline and in terms of what they're learning. That's where it will start. It will be affected by other outside issues, political issues and so on. But the sense of belonging needs to happen in the curriculum, in the university, so that that can kind of generate out, if you like. And it'll be the university bringing the community in and going out to the community, and that's how that kind of sense of place and belonging will develop. But I agree, we're not being helped in many ways by political, the laws changing, saying we want more international students but we're capping it, and that sense of being kind of foreign, if you like, and I'm putting that foreign in air quotes, is only going to be exacerbated by those sorts of changes in the law. So,
Just to pick up on that, I'm thinking that in the last year or so, because of that change, the university's done something about that in creating job opportunities for students within the university and done lots more to look at work placements and things like that. And yeah, I just think a lot of the good initiatives come because of a challenge and a difficulty. People find ways around it, so there is always that creativity.
Because I just checked the new regulation. They say the student, they can stay here, but only two ways. One way is they can apply as the entrepreneurship.
Right.
That means they need to invest a lot of money and also something like that. The second way is they can get the job if the salary is over £2,000 per month. So the practical problem is, sorry, it's more detailed.
So they can stay on a Sunday in a blue moon, when, it's making it difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, especially for international students, because we know the currently UK situation is not very good. I mean, lots of economic recession, and even local students, they don't have enough opportunity to get a job. How could international students, they can competitive, and so looking for the job and also get this high salary.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And that's, as Viv's just said, that's all the more reason why, if international students are not allowed to stay after the end of their programme, that's all the more reason we need to pack in as much as possible, as humanly possible during that time, and make their degrees, developing them, their employability skills as much as they can, and that informal curriculum will do that.
I think that also is another example of why we perhaps shouldn't think in terms of international and national, because our national students possibly need to go overseas in order to find employment. It isn't just international students that are going to be going back home, it's our own students that need to be exported around the world, and so being prepared for a global environment becomes important for all.
Andrew?
The research that you carried out, the more broad question would be, how have you applied that more immediately to your own institution? I think from what you've said and where our project is heading, my real question is the differentiation between options of undergraduate where you've got 3 years contact, 3 years opportunity to blend, as opposed to the very high expectations of postgraduate study, as to whether or not you differentiated in your own mind the respective opportunities and challenges that each present.
Yeah, there's a big difference between that undergraduate and postgraduate experience, isn't it? And it's not so bad for doctoral students because they have that length of time. And for master's students, that's that kind of really, probably 18 months to kind of get here and get them absolutely the most that they possibly can out of the experience. But my experience is that is exactly what they do. They know how long they're going to be here, they know how much they need to pack in, and they're determined, and that's borne out by their engagement in voluntary and extracurricular activities. They're really seeking as much as they possibly can out of the experience. And answer to your first question, I mean, there's a lot of things we've done to try to kind of, test out whether this research is as we think it is. Most recently, a project that I've led in teacher training, where we've teacher training programs can be rather prescriptive, and like to keep their secondary teachers away from their primary teachers, like to keep their English teachers away from their maths teachers. So we've kind of chucked that out of the window, taken them all off site to an environmental centre. Actually, this was happening yesterday, part of the project. Stuck the primary and secondary staff together, put all the different subjects together, said, okay, off you go, we're going to do a project. It was the Oosburn Farm, which is a post-industrial sort of place with loads of bridges and really interesting stuff going on. Okay, off you go, open tasks. We're going to learn about this area, then you're going to tell us how you're going to use it to teach in your curriculum. So we are trying projects out and trying to find ways of applying these ideas in practice and in the curriculum.
Thank you for the good presentation.
Thank you.
In this presentation you mentioned that there is a need for developing the globally acceptable curriculum. That how we can initiate that, because there is a, suppose if students wants to come from developing countries like India or China or other part of Asia, so there is some gap in the curriculum. Like for example, if they complete their undergraduates and they have to come for post-graduation here, there's a gap in that curriculum.
Yeah.
So how we can able to...
Yeah. So you're thinking the gap is about the
In
discipline?
undergraduates, yeah. Sometimes the duration of the program is more.
Yeah.
But when they, and especially in the UK, when we evaluate the curriculum, they mention that one or two component of that undergraduate program is not fulfilled.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how do we able to fill this gap?
Yeah. Well.
And also when we come to the postgraduate, UK degree is ranging from, like especially in the health science, from 1 year to 18 months. Whereas in other countries it is 2 years to 3 years. Sometimes if they go back, there will be a chance for them that even though it's a, from the developed country degree, there's a chance of that they may not accept that degree because the duration is less.
Yeah. Yeah. There's quite a couple of things there. I think you're right that the articulation degrees where 2 years in one country and a third year in another country, do the curricula match? Does the third year look at what they've done in their home country? I think sometimes not. They should. And obviously there's lots of different models of that transnational education. But what is starting is the model where the teaching in the third year learns from what happens in the first and second year. So that means that people who teach in the third year need to go and take some part in what's going on. I mean, it's absolutely not the right thing to do, to lift up a curriculum from the UK and splat it onto a country. Say, there you go, pick the bones out of that one, it's literature, it's Shakespeare, it's what we do here, must be good enough, it's good enough for us, it's good enough for you. That is starting to be accepted as not the right thing, and that, building bridges between that, 2+1 or 3+1, whatever it is becoming much, much more common. And the exchange of staff mobility is much more frequent than it used to be. Between here and China, between here and other countries, but still not enough. We're still kind of building, universities are still building campuses. Is anyone linked with Nottingham University? Great, I can see what I want. Nottingham University built a campus in, I think, Ningbo. And bizarrely, who thought this up? It looks exactly like the one in Nottingham. What a great idea. Sorry, don't call that. So, but why would it be that people would think from one country to another? You cannot do that. It needs to be contextualised. It needs to have input from, from the disciplines of that particular country. That's starting to happen. It hasn't happened enough yet.
All right, so I'll say thank you again. I think a really interesting development for this afternoon, and a good basis for some of the sessions which are going to follow on a lot, I know, from the kind of things that you've been talking about, the idea of informal learning, peer support, and also mobility schemes and exchange. So we're just on time, I think. So we're doing really well today. So go have a warm up and outside.